Trapped in a bear trap, the pit bull was saved by a man, but what the dog did next was anyone's guess. Trapped in a bear trap, the pit bull's cries of agony pierced through the forest air, stopping David in his tracks. He had heard many sounds during his hikes, but this was different. This was a desperate call for help. Compelled by something he couldn't explain, David left the safety of the trail and followed the sound. What he discovered would not only test his courage, but also reveal an unbreakable bond between man and dog. This is the story of resilience, compassion, and a pit bull who did the unimaginable after being saved. Before we dive into this emotional story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring more inspiring tales like this one. David had always found solace in the forest. The towering pines, the scent of damp earth, and the rhythmic chirping of birds were his escape from the chaos of city life. That Saturday, he set out for what he thought would be another ordinary hike. The early morning sun filtered through the canopy, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor as he tread the familiar trail with his backpack slung over one shoulder. But halfway into his hike, a sharp, anguished sound broke through the serene melody of nature. It wasn't the call of any bird or animal he had ever heard before. It was a cry of pain, raw and desperate. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound came again, louder this time, reverberating through the stillness of the woods. David's instincts screamed at him to investigate, though a flicker of fear told him to turn back. Swallowing hard, he adjusted his backpack and stepped off the trail, letting the mournful cries guide him. The deeper he ventured, the denser the forest became. Branches clawed at his jacket, and uneven ground slowed his pace, but the cries grew clearer, urging him forward. After what felt like an eternity, he reached a small clearing. There, among the fallen leaves and broken branches, lay the source of the sound, a pit bull trapped in a cruel steel bear trap. David's breath caught in his throat. The dog was a patchy brown and white, its once powerful body now trembling with exhaustion and pain. Its right front paw was clamped tightly in the jaws of the trap, blood staining the fur around the wound. The animal's chest heaved as it whimpered, its soulful eyes locking onto David's with a mixture of fear and pleading. "Hey, buddy," David said softly, his voice trembling. He crouched a few feet away, careful not to startle the injured animal. "It's okay. I'm here to help." The pit bull growled low, its teeth bared in a weak warning. But David didn't retreat. He knew the growl wasn't aggression, it was fear. "You're scared, I get it," he continued, reaching slowly into his bag. He pulled out a water bottle and unscrewed the cap. "You must be thirsty." Pouring a small stream of water into his hand, he extended it cautiously. The dog hesitated, its dark eyes flickering between David and the offered water. Finally, with a trembling movement, it leaned forward and lapped at the liquid, its growl subsiding into soft whimpers. David took that as a sign of trust. He set the water bottle aside and studied the bear trap. It was old and rusted, the jagged metal teeth biting deep into the dog's flesh. His stomach churned at the sight, but he knew he had to act fast. "This is going to hurt, but we'll get through it together," he said. Reaching into his backpack again, he retrieved a thick cloth and a multi-tool. Wrapping the cloth around his hands for protection, he moved closer to the trap. The pit bull flinched and let out a yelp, but David murmured soothingly, "Easy, boy. I won't hurt you. I promise." Positioning himself carefully, David began to pry the trap open. His arms strained as the rusted springs resisted, but he gritted his teeth and pushed harder. The pit bull whimpered, its body trembling with fear and pain, but it didn't lash out. It seemed to understand that David was trying to help. After a grueling few minutes, the trap finally released with a loud snap. The pit bull yelped as its paw was freed, but it didn't try to run. Instead, it collapsed onto its side, panting heavily. David quickly tore a strip from his shirt and wrapped it around the bleeding paw to slow the blood flow. "You're going to be okay," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He stroked the dog's head gently, surprised by how quickly he felt connected to this injured creature. The pit bull leaned into his touch, its eyes closing briefly, as if it finally felt safe. David knew the journey wasn't over. They were deep in the forest, and the dog needed medical attention immediately. Gathering his strength, he slipped off his jacket and carefully wrapped it around the pit bull. Then, he lifted the dog into his arms. "You're heavier than you look," he grunted, adjusting the weight. The pit bull rested its head against his chest, letting out a soft sigh that melted David's heart. With determined steps, David began the trek back to civilization. He didn't know what awaited them at the end of this journey, but one thing was clear: he wasn't leaving this dog behind. David's arms burned with effort as he carried the injured pit bull through the dense forest. Each step seemed heavier than the last, but he refused to stop. The dog, cradled in his arms, lay motionless, except for the occasional twitch of its ears at the rustling sounds around them. David could feel its shallow breaths against his chest, a faint reminder that time was running out. "Hang in there, buddy," David muttered, his voice breaking the silence. The pit bull's head shifted slightly, its dark eyes glancing up at him with a mix of exhaustion and cautious hope. The trek back to the main trail was grueling. Branches scraped at David's arms, and uneven ground threatened to trip him at every turn. The added weight of the pit bull made it all the more difficult, but each step brought them closer to help, or so he hoped. The dog whimpered softly, its body trembling with every jostle. David stopped momentarily, setting the dog down gently on a bed of moss. "I know it hurts," he said, crouching to stroke its head, "but I promise you, we'll get through this." The pit bull blinked at him, and for a brief moment David thought he saw a flicker of gratitude in its eyes. He grabbed his water bottle and poured a small amount into his hand, offering it to the dog once more. The pit bull licked at it hesitantly, its movements slow but deliberate. David couldn't help but smile. "That's it. Stay strong, buddy." The forest was eerily quiet, save for the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional distant chirp of birds. David's mind raced as he thought about the nearest vet clinic. He wasn't sure how far away it was, but he knew he had to make it there. The dog's paw was still bleeding despite his makeshift bandage, and infection was a real danger. As they trudged on, David began talking to the dog, hoping his voice would keep it calm. "You know," he started, "I've never really been a dog person. Always figured I was too busy for one. But here we are, huh? Guess you have a way of changing minds." The pit bull let out a faint huff, almost as if it understood. David's determination faltered only once, when he heard the distant growl of thunder. Looking up, he noticed the sky darkening through the trees. "Perfect," he muttered. A storm was the last thing they needed. He quickened his pace, ignoring the burning in his legs and the strain in his arms. After what felt like hours, the forest began to thin, and the faint outline of the main trail came into view. Relief washed over David, but it was short-lived. The dog let out a sharp whine, its body tensing in his arms. David stopped immediately, his heart pounding. "What's wrong?" he asked, scanning their surroundings. His eyes fell on the dog's injured paw, which was now bleeding through the bandage. The sight sent a surge of panic through him. "We need to move faster," he muttered, adjusting his grip. The dog whimpered again, but didn't resist as David hoisted it higher against his chest. The trail eventually led to a small clearing where David had parked his truck. The sight of the vehicle felt like a lifeline. "We're almost there," he said, his voice laced with both relief and urgency. He carefully placed the pit bull on the back seat, using his jacket to prop its head. The dog's eyes fluttered open briefly before closing again, its breaths shallow but steady. Sliding into the driver's seat, David started the engine and sped off. The rain began to fall in earnest, pounding against the windshield as he navigated the winding roads. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching the pit bull for any signs of distress. "We're going to make it," he said, more to himself than to the dog. "Just hold on." When the clinic's neon sign came into view, David felt a wave of hope. He pulled into the parking lot, not even bothering to park properly as he jumped out and ran to the back seat. Lifting the pit bull as gently as he could, he carried it inside, the bell above the door jangling loudly. A receptionist looked up in shock as David burst through the doors, soaked from the rain and clutching the injured dog. "I need help." "He's been caught in a bear trap," he said breathlessly. The staff sprang into action, guiding David to an examination room. A vet quickly took over, examining the pit bull with practiced hands. "He's lost a lot of blood," the vet said grimly, "but you got him here just in time." David stood off to the side, his heart racing as he watched them work. The pit bull, despite its pain, remained remarkably calm, its eyes flicking over to David occasionally. He felt a strange sense of connection, as if the dog understood that he was trying to save it. As the vet continued their work, David leaned against the wall, his exhaustion finally catching up to him. "You're going to be okay," he whispered, more to himself than to the dog. "You have to be." David sat in the waiting room, his drenched clothes clinging to him as rain dripped from his hair onto the linoleum floor. His heart felt heavy with a mix of worry and exhaustion. Through the small window of the examination room, he could see the veterinarian and her assistants working diligently on the injured pit bull. The dog lay still on the table, its battered body a heartbreaking sight. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. David's thoughts swirled with doubts and questions. Had he done enough? Was he too late? Every time the door to the examination room opened, his head snapped up, hoping for news. Finally, the vet emerged, wiping her hands on her scrubs. She looked tired but offered a small, reassuring smile. "He's stable for now," she said. David exhaled deeply, relief washing over him like a wave. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The vet nodded, her tone soft but serious. "He's a fighter, that's for sure. The trap caused some significant damage to his paw, and he's going to need stitches and antibiotics to prevent infection. But the good news is, you brought him in just in time." David nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "Can I see him?" "Of course," the vet replied, leading him back into the room. The sight of the pit bull made David's chest tighten. The dog lay on a padded table, its injured paw now carefully bandaged. An IV line was attached to its leg, delivering fluids and pain medication. Despite its weakened state, the dog's eyes opened as David approached. "Hey, buddy," David said softly, crouching beside the table. He reached out and gently stroked the dog's head. The pit bull let out a low, contented sigh, its eyes filled with an unspoken gratitude. "He's lucky to have you," the vet said, watching the interaction. David shook his head. "I think I'm the lucky one. I wasn't planning to hike today. I almost stayed home. But something told me to go." The vet smiled knowingly. Sometimes, fate has a funny way of bringing us where we're needed most. David stayed by the pit bull's side as the hours passed. He found himself talking to the dog, sharing bits of his life as if the animal could truly understand. He told him about the struggles of balancing work and life, the loneliness he often felt in the city, and how he had always admired the loyalty of dogs, but had never owned one himself. The pit bull listened in silence, its gaze steady and calm. It was a comforting presence, even in its vulnerable state. When the vet returned later that evening, she had more news. "He's going to need a few days here to recover, but after that, he'll need a place to rest and heal. Do you have any experience with dogs?" David hesitated. "Not really, but I'll do whatever it takes to help him." The vet nodded approvingly. "That's good to hear. He'll need a quiet environment, regular wound care, and plenty of rest. We'll give you all the instructions you need." Over the next few days, David made frequent visits to the clinic, checking on the pit bull and preparing for its discharge. He stopped by a pet store to gather supplies, a soft bed, food, toys, and even a collar and leash. By the time the dog was ready to leave, David felt a sense of responsibility he hadn't expected. The bond they had formed in those short days was undeniable. As he carried the pit bull out of the clinic and into his truck, David looked down at the dog cradled in his arms. "I think I'll call you Bear," he said with a smile. "Seems fitting, considering what we've been through." Bear wagged his tail weakly, his eyes brightening at the sound of his new name. David chuckled, feeling an unexpected warmth spread through him. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. The drive home was quiet, but comforting. Bear rested peacefully on the passenger seat, his head occasionally lifting to glance at David. It was as if he already understood that this man had saved him, and that he was safe now. When they arrived at David's small apartment, he carefully carried Bear inside, setting him down gently on the new bed he had bought. Bear sniffed at it cautiously before settling in with a soft grunt. David watched him, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. He knew this was just the beginning of their journey, and there were still challenges ahead. But for now, they were both exactly where they needed to be. David woke early the next morning, the first rays of sunlight filtering through his apartment window. He glanced over at the makeshift corner he had prepared for Bear. The pit bull was curled up on the soft bed, his breathing slow and steady. It was the most peaceful David had seen him since they met. As David moved quietly to prepare coffee, Bear's eyes fluttered open. He stretched cautiously, his movements careful as he adjusted to the bandaged paw. When his gaze met David's, his tail gave a small wag, a gesture that made David smile. "Morning, buddy," David said softly, kneeling by Bear's side. "How are you feeling?" He gently rubbed the dog's head, careful not to disturb his injuries. Bear responded with a soft huff, leaning into David's touch. Over the next few days, a routine began to take shape. David juggled his remote work schedule with Bear's care, ensuring the dog had his medication, regular meals, and plenty of time to rest. The trust between them deepened with each passing day. Bear, once timid and cautious, began to show glimpses of his true personality, playful, curious, and fiercely loyal. David marveled at how quickly Bear adapted to his new environment. Despite the pain he must have endured, the pit bull had a remarkable resilience. He would hobble to the kitchen whenever he heard the sound of kibble being poured into his bowl, his tail wagging enthusiastically. On warmer days, David took him to a nearby park for short walks, careful not to overexert him. It was on one of these walks that David noticed something remarkable. As they strolled along a quiet path, Bear stopped suddenly, his ears perking up. David followed his gaze and saw a young boy sitting on a bench with his mother, clutching a small toy dog. The boy seemed nervous, pulling the toy closer as Bear watched him intently. David knelt beside Bear, giving his leash a gentle tug. "Come on, buddy. Let's not bother them." But before he could move, Bear wagged his tail and let out a soft bark, not loud or aggressive, but inviting. The boy's mother smiled cautiously, encouraging her son. "It's okay, sweetie. You can say hi." The boy hesitated before taking a tentative step toward Bear. David knelt to Bear's level, holding the leash firmly, but allowing the interaction. "It's okay," David said gently to the boy. "He's friendly." Bear seemed to understand the need for patience. He sat still, his gaze calm and inviting, as the boy reached out a tiny hand. When the boy finally touched Bear's head, the dog let out a happy huff, leaning slightly into the touch. The boy giggled, his nervousness melting away. "He's so soft," he exclaimed, his eyes lighting up. David chuckled. "Yeah, he's a good boy." As the mother thanked David and led her son away, David noticed a profound change in Bear. The dog stood a little taller, his tail wagging steadily, as if he knew he had made a difference. It wasn't just David who needed Bear. Bear was finding his purpose, too. That evening, as they returned home, David sat on the floor beside Bear's bed, stroking his fur. "You're something special, you know that?" he said softly. Bear looked up at him, his dark eyes shining with an unspoken bond. In the weeks that followed, Bear continued to heal, both physically and emotionally. His paw, once mangled and bloodied, was now on the mend, thanks to David's care and the vet's guidance. The bond between them grew stronger with every walk, every meal, and every quiet moment shared in their small apartment. One night, as David prepared for bed, he heard a soft whine from Bear's corner. Turning, he saw the pit bull standing by the door, his leash dangling from his mouth. David laughed. "You want one more walk before bed, huh?" Bear wagged his tail, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. David shook his head with a smile, grabbing the leash and slipping on his shoes. "All right, buddy, let's go." As they stepped into the cool night air, David realized how much his life had changed since that fateful day in the forest. Bear wasn't just a dog. He was a reminder of resilience, of the power of second chances, and of the unbreakable bond that can form between two souls who need each other. Walking under the glow of the streetlights, David looked down at Bear, who trotted happily beside him despite his healing paw. "You saved me as much as I saved you," he murmured, his voice filled with gratitude. Bear glanced up at him, his tail wagging as if to say, "I know." The weeks turned into months, and Bear's recovery became a story of transformation. His limp gradually lessened as his paw healed, and the once timid, injured dog blossomed into a lively, confident companion. Everywhere David went, Bear was by his side, his wagging tail a testament to the unbreakable bond they had formed. One afternoon, as David sorted through his emails, a message caught his attention. It was from a local animal shelter, the same one he had contacted when gathering advice on how to care for Bear. The email highlighted an upcoming community event, a volunteer day to help promote animal rescue awareness. They needed participants to showcase rescue stories, and David couldn't help but think of Bear. "Looks like we've got plans for Saturday," David said, glancing over at Bear, who lay sprawled on the couch, gnawing on his favorite chew toy. The dog tilted his head, his ears perking up as if understanding. David chuckled. "You'll be the star of the show." When the day arrived, the shelter's grounds buzzed with activity. Families, volunteers, and their furry companions filled the area, the air alive with laughter and the occasional excited bark. David held Bear's leash tightly as they navigated through the crowd, the pit bull's strong yet calm presence drawing curious glances and warm smiles. Near the main tent, a group of children gathered around an older volunteer who was sharing stories about rescue dogs. David hesitated, unsure if Bear would feel comfortable in such a busy environment, but the dog surprised him. He wagged his tail and stepped forward, his eyes focused on the children. "You want to say hi, huh?" David asked, crouching beside him. Bear responded with a soft bark, his gaze fixed on the group. David smiled and led him closer. The children squealed with excitement as Bear approached. "Can we pet him?" one of them asked, their small hands already reaching out. David nodded, kneeling beside Bear to keep him calm. "Of course. Just be gentle. He's still recovering." Bear stood patiently as the children surrounded him, their hands running over his smooth fur. David watched in awe as the dog responded with quiet enthusiasm, his tail wagging steadily. For a dog that had endured so much, Bear radiated trust and warmth, as if he understood the importance of this moment. "He's so nice," one girl exclaimed. "What happened to him?" another asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. David took a deep breath, his mind flashing back to that harrowing day in the forest. "Bear was hurt pretty badly when I found him. He was caught in a bear trap and left all alone. But he's a fighter, and he never gave up." The children listened intently, their expressions shifting from sadness to admiration. "And now he's okay?" a boy asked. David smiled, glancing at Bear, who was soaking up the attention with a contented expression. "Yeah, he's more than okay. He's my best friend." As the day continued, Bear's gentle demeanor and resilience won over everyone he met. People stopped to ask about his story, and David found himself recounting it over and over, each time feeling a deeper sense of pride in the dog that had become his constant companion. Toward the end of the event, a woman approached David with a clipboard in hand. "Hi, I'm Maria," she said, smiling warmly. "I'm one of the organizers here. I couldn't help but notice Bear. He's incredible." David nodded, glancing down at the dog. "He really is." "We're actually looking for therapy dogs to visit hospitals and schools," Maria continued. "Dogs like Bear, with stories of resilience, can make such a difference in people's lives. Have you ever thought about something like that?" David was taken aback. He had never considered Bear as more than a pet, but the idea made sense. Bear had a calm, comforting presence, and a way of connecting with people that was undeniable. "I haven't, but I'd love to give it a try." Maria beamed. "That's wonderful. We'd love to have you both. I'll send you all the information." As they left the event that afternoon, David couldn't stop thinking about the opportunity. Bear, who had been through so much, could now bring hope and healing to others. It felt like destiny, as though everything they had endured together had led to this moment. Back at home, David sat on the floor beside Bear, stroking his fur as the dog rested his head on David's lap. "What do you think, buddy? Ready to be a hero for other people, too?" Bear wagged his tail, his eyes full of trust and affection. David smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You've already changed my life, Bear. Now it's time to change the world." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. David and Bear attended training sessions at a local center for therapy animals, where they learned how to navigate the challenges of working in sensitive environments. Bear took to the training with remarkable ease, his calm demeanor and natural empathy impressing the instructors. David couldn't help but marvel at Bear's transformation. The dog that had once been broken and afraid was now radiating confidence, wagging his tail as children read to him during mock therapy sessions or resting his head in the lap of someone who needed comfort. Bear seemed to understand his role instinctively, sensing when to be playful and when to be still. On their first official assignment, David and Bear were invited to visit a children's hospital. As they entered the brightly lit building, David felt a wave of nervousness. He glanced down at Bear, who walked steadily by his side, his leash loose in David's hand. The dog's calm presence was a source of reassurance. The hospital staff greeted them warmly, leading them to a playroom filled with young patients. Some were in wheelchairs, others with IV stands trailing behind them. The room was filled with soft laughter and the hum of cartoons playing on a small TV, but David could see the weariness in the children's eyes. When Bear entered, the atmosphere shifted. Heads turned, and smiles spread across the children's faces. One little girl with a bald head and a pink hospital gown gasped. "A doggie!" she exclaimed, her voice filled with delight. David knelt beside Bear, giving the leash a gentle tug. "Go ahead, buddy," he said. Bear walked toward the girl, his tail wagging gently. He stopped just short of her, sitting patiently as she reached out to pet him. The girl's giggles filled the room as Bear licked her hand. "He's so soft," she said, her laughter contagious. Soon, other children gathered around, their faces lighting up as they stroked Bear's fur or offered him treats. One boy, who had been sitting quietly in a corner, slowly wheeled his chair closer. David noticed him immediately, a boy with thick glasses and a shy demeanor. Bear seemed to notice him too. Without prompting, the dog walked over to the boy, his tail wagging in encouragement. "Do you want to pet him?" David asked gently. The boy hesitated before nodding. Bear sat patiently as the boy extended a tentative hand. When he finally touched Bear's head, his face broke into a wide smile. "He's amazing," the boy whispered. David's chest tightened. Moments like this reminded him why Bear's journey mattered. This dog, who had endured so much, was now bringing joy and comfort to those who needed it most. As their visit continued, Bear moved from child to child, his presence lifting spirits and spreading smiles. David shared their story with the staff and parents, explaining how Bear had overcome unimaginable pain to become the dog he was today. One of the nurses approached David as the visit wrapped up. "You know, I've seen therapy animals work wonders, but there's something special about Bear," she said. "It's like he knows exactly what each child needs." David glanced at Bear, who was lying on the floor with a small boy curled up beside him. "Yeah," David said, his voice filled with emotion. "He really does." When it was time to leave, the children waved goodbye, their voices filled with gratitude. "Bye, Bear. Come back soon," they called out. Bear wagged his tail, his eyes shining as he looked at David. On the drive home, David couldn't stop smiling. He reached over to scratch Bear's ears. "You were incredible today, buddy. I'm so proud of you." Bear responded with a soft huff, leaning into David's hand. As they pulled into the driveway, David realized something profound. Bear wasn't just a dog. He was a symbol of hope, a living testament to the power of resilience and compassion. Later that evening, as Bear rested on his bed, David sat beside him, reflecting on the day. "You're not just my hero, Bear," he said softly. "You're everyone's hero now." Bear looked up at him, his dark eyes filled with loyalty and trust. In that moment, David knew their journey together was only beginning, and the impact Bear would make on the world was limitless. Months passed, and Bear's reputation as a therapy dog grew. His visits to hospitals, schools, and community centers left a trail of joy and healing wherever he went. David often found himself reflecting on how far they had come, from a chance encounter in the forest to changing lives together. Bear had become a local hero, adored by everyone who met him. One crisp autumn morning, David and Bear were invited to a special event at the hospital. The staff had planned a ceremony to honor therapy animals and their contributions to the community. As David adjusted his tie and Bear sat patiently by his side, the anticipation in the room was palpable. The hospital director took the stage, addressing the crowd of parents, children, and volunteers. "Today, we celebrate the incredible work of these animals who bring comfort, hope, and love to those in need. One dog in particular has touched countless lives with his resilience and kindness. Bear, we thank you." The audience erupted into applause as David guided Bear to the front of the room. Bear, wearing a small bandana embroidered with his name, wagged his tail enthusiastically, his bright eyes scanning the crowd. David knelt beside him, feeling a swell of pride. A young boy stepped forward, clutching a small box. David recognized him immediately. It was the shy boy from their first hospital visit. The boy's face lit up as he approached Bear, who sat still, wagging his tail. "Thank you for being my friend," the boy said softly, holding out the box. David took the box and opened it, revealing a medal engraved with the words, "Hero of Hope." Emotion welled up in his chest as he fastened the medal to Bear's bandana. "You've earned this, buddy," he whispered. The ceremony ended with smiles and tears, but it wasn't the end of Bear's day. As they made their way through the hospital halls, Bear stopped at a familiar room. Inside was the little girl who had laughed so brightly during their first visit. She was hooked up to machines, her energy visibly drained. Bear nudged the door open with his nose, and David followed. The girl's face lit up when she saw them. "Bear!" she exclaimed weakly, her voice filled with joy. David knelt beside her bed, letting Bear get closer. The pit bull rested his head gently on the girl's lap, his dark eyes watching her intently. She stroked his fur, a faint smile spreading across her face. "You came back," she whispered. David felt a lump in his throat as he watched the connection between them. "Of course we did," he said softly. Bear wouldn't miss seeing his favorite friend. The girl's mother stood nearby, tears streaming down her face. "He's been the one thing she talks about every day," she said. "Thank you for bringing him." As they left the hospital that evening, David realized how much Bear had given. Not just to others, but to him. The dog had taught him about resilience, about finding purpose in the face of hardship, and about the power of love and connection. That night, David sat on the couch with Bear curled up beside him. He scratched behind the dog's ears, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "You've changed my life, Bear," he said, "and so many others. You're a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's always hope." Bear let out a soft sigh, leaning into David's touch. It was as if he understood every word. The next morning, David woke to find Bear waiting by the door, leash in mouth. David laughed, grabbing his shoes. "Another adventure, huh?" he said. "All right, let's go." As they stepped outside into the crisp morning air, David knew one thing for certain. Their journey together was far from over. Together, they would continue to spread hope and healing, proving that even the most broken moments can lead to the most beautiful transformations. As David and Bear walked into the rising sun, their bond felt unbreakable. Together, they had turned pain into purpose and shared hope with countless lives. Bear wasn't just a dog, he was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's light waiting to be found. If Bear's journey touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this. Hit the like button, share this video with someone who loves animals, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Together, let's celebrate the incredible bond between humans and animals. Thank you for watching.